What is the major difference between autopilot and flow state? Watch this to find out.
Yeah. I'm inspired. I'm inspired.
Flow Mashkaram and Flow Mastay. My name is Sumet Chatterjee from the Flow Zone Academy, and I'm a flow state coach, which means that I help you feel better and perform better, okay? Today I'm going to help you differentiate between being in an autopilot state and being in the flow state, okay? Video is not easy to explain. It just so happens that the flow state or autopilot mind is never easy to describe. However, I'm going to try my optimal best. Let's get started. What do you think when you think of the word autopilot? Let's start there. What do we think if we think about autopilot? When it's not really about thinking, but let's think about it, okay? Using logic. To me, what's coming up is it's almost like a zombie mode. It's unawareness. It's mindlessly drifting and wandering. It's when something kicks in that's second nature to you because you've taken that action so many times that it's become a habit or a routine for you. Or you've created a sort of heuristic, which is another way of saying mental shortcut. Okay, heuristic is a mental shortcut, so it saves you time. And we do this with a lot of things, okay? It's important to recognize heuristics. There's a video I have on heuristics. You can check it out after this one. You know, our minds always have this tendency to automate things. It likes doing that, right? So we have to know the tendency of the mind. Let's start there. We automate things because we want life to be easier for us. We want it to be more simple, more straightforward. The brain doesn't like overcomplication, and it does not respond to the negative. Don't think of pink elephants, you think of pink elephants. It does not respond to loss, it only responds to gain. Autopilot is sometimes called, in the scientific community, as default mode network. It's a specific area in the brain, the DMN, and it gets repeated so we don't get wrong. As you start doing a task over time, it becomes more effortless for you. So we've heard of wu-wei, effortless effort, okay? The action of non-action, the doing of non-doing. I don't hit, it hits all by itself. As you go to the gym, you're going to make improvements. As you start driving more and more, you're going to make improvements. Anything that you do, any task that you keep doing repeatedly, you're going to start to make little improvements. But there comes a certain point where you've learned it already, and it gets stuffed in the back of the mind. Say, you know, something shocks us or surprises us, or, you know, just completely something random happens. That can break us out of the default mode. But also being very mindful of our five senses can also break us out of that. This next statement is purely an opinion, and I heard this from my mentor, AZD. What happens is, in an autopilot state, the thoughts, right, are actually detoxing. That's why you sometimes have thoughts when you're in autopilot as well. They're being released, and we think we have to act on those thoughts. But there's a detox happening. So the autopilot mode is like brushing your teeth, you know, getting up in the morning, you know, taking a shower, you know, eating food. You don't consciously really have to think so much during these activities. You're just doing, right? These are all autopilot because we don't need our full awareness for these things. I've noticed this in a lot of clients who play a lot of video games. They get stuck in an autopilot mode. They're not in a flow state, right? They're in an autopilot state where they're repeating the same level that's so easy, so the challenge doesn't meet the skill actually. It becomes effortless, so easy, right, that it almost resembles closer to that boredom or that neutrality. Another way you can break yourself out of the autopilot mode is to change your perspective. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, right? Wayne Dyer. In flow state, there's a responsibility. There's a sense of control happening, okay? It's almost an exploitation happening a little bit because we are engineering a state of mind. Whereas in autopilot, we're just letting go and just completely getting into our baseline state. The difference between flow and DMN or autopilot mode, the default mode network actually slows down as a result of the research on flow state, okay? Flow state slows down the DMN because it doesn't have that self-referential thing of like the self-talk. Sometimes in autopilot, you'll just notice your thoughts kind of like, you know, looping. That doesn't happen in flow state. You're just being present. The more a task is difficult, it can also change and transform and alter the way you experience the default mode network or the autopilot mode. You put your phone on autopilot when it's like on that do not disturb, right? So the way you think about it is like, okay, you don't need to use your conscious mind so much to do this activity. It's a subconscious activity because you've already learned it in a sense. It's like, I don't need to try to drink water. You know what I mean? I just do it. You don't need to try to digest. No, it's a natural process. It's autopilot. But flow state starts off, remember, with struggle, release, flow, and recovery. Flow is not autopilot, but flow is autotelic. Autotelic means it's a reward by itself. Self-goal. Auto and telos. It's about seeing things as is, without concepts, without fabrication, without additives and preservatives, without intellect, without overcompensation, without so many words. The similarity between both is that they're both underlying, right? Flow is a state, and autopilot is also another trance-like state, but it's also a baseline state. So both are underlying. Presence is underlying. As Eckhart Tolle also says, presence is underlying. Autopilot is also underlying. The flow state is almost a combination of an alert presence or a hyperfocus with a dreamlike euphoria, a really feel-good concoction in the body and mind. Autopilot can actually be apathy, it can be the opposite of flow, right? It can be numbness, it can be suppression of emotions. What if you have bad habits? You can also be on autopilot on those. But generally speaking, flow state is related to peak performance and feeling good. While they do share some commonalities, they're almost the opposite to each other, okay? In flow, it's this timeless absorption with this hyper-awareness. Flow isn't autopilot, but you can make your flow autopilot. When the act has been mastered, okay? If you've ever seen the levels of competence, okay? It can be unconscious incompetence, which is a wrong intuition. Conscious incompetence, which is a wrong analysis. Conscious competence, which is a right analysis, and unconscious competence. This is when it becomes second nature. You've mastered it. This is flow state. That's also referred to as second nature or right intuition. So flow state is about that unconscious competence, so that level of mastery. Let's say you're a legendary dancer, okay? And that's how you access flow state. After a while, you're not going to have to think about your movements when you improvise. It's just going to happen. You're just going to follow the impulse. That's that right intuition, or that unconscious competence. So flow can feel good. Autopilot can feel kind of numb or depressing. Okay, we're just going about our day, same mundane routine. It's not really generating flow state because there's no level of enjoyment. Okay? There's a woman who has a system called In the Flow, and she stacks 3 things: complimenting yourself daily, gratitude daily, and something called yesterday's best thing. So reflect on yesterday to integrate the best thing that happened to you yesterday. If you keep these in your visualization or in your mind or in your daily practice, it starts to get you more and more in the flow, which is the system's name. So autopilot isn't presence per se, right? It's more of a trance. It's more of a hypnosis, like a docile or a subdued state. We're not really exerting that much effort. Flow state is not trance, but it's trance-like. So flow state or wu is like the waves. Autopilot is like the current. Either way, both are dealing with the subconscious mind. One is more of a utilization of a subconscious blending and a learning that's happening in the moment, and you feel like you're improving, your challenge skills ratio is matching. Another one, you just feel kind of in this state of boredom or relaxation or neutrality, and flow state is slightly above neutrality, okay? At least that's how Frederick Dodson describes it. I'm going through his book again quite recently for our flow state book club. Flow is also about feeling and being rather than thinking about it. Autopilot does contain thinking at times. On autopilot, which is automatic pilot, you're functioning without conscious thought. So you are in a subconscious state, but it's much closer to a more dreamlike or a trance-like state rather than an effective peak performance state. Remember, presence can also happen with thinking. I told you, powerful videos, rain, right? This is what happens. Or thunder, Vajra. I'm on the Vajrayana path, so there we go. Blessings from the gods, thank you. Remember, presence can actually happen when thinking, but it becomes a distorted presence. It becomes an over-intellectualized, sometimes we can't really synchronize our right intuition with the right analysis. Well, this is what is sometimes required of us living in a modern world. Remember, your primary state is that presence, is that mindfulness. So have a mindfulness practice, man, where you're consciously like doing things that get you back into your senses. Not being senseless, you're being sensitive, not in a sensitive, simple, like, way, but you're being more sensitive to your unconscious powers that are within you. Presence slows down the overactive mind. That's one of the major ways that you can stop that excessive overthinking is presence. Practicing presence actively. When I'm in autopilot, I'm not like, how about the bed? I turn my swag on. And then it's like, what's up? Hey, I'm getting money. It's not that, right? Autopilot's kind of like, I'm brushing my teeth. Okay? As a woman, you're like, I'm doing my nails. Okay? Doing my makeup. Okay, right? You're not tapped in. You're not in the flow state yet. But you're just in that default mode state. You're in neutrality. You're in that balance of the mind where it's just where your brain goes to, your baseline happiness, your levels of that state of mind that you naturally have, which is partly genetic, partly you can take action, partly circumstance. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot me a message. This is my response, okay, from what I know. A lot of you may argue and be like, oh, they're the same thing or whatever. This is my perspective as a flow state coach, okay? I have a master's in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, and I have chosen to dedicate my life to the state of consciousness. So there you have it. Have an incredible day. May the flow be with you and stay legendary. Let's get it. Hit that subscribe button if you're new. You already know. Let's go.